I've decided to re-release this video now that I've returned home and I have access to my recording equipment again. One request was made for me to do this, and I've decided to do so as it gives me the chance to expand a little bit more on this issue. As with the text version of the video, the link's in the below bar. I'll read a little bit from the Care 2 article. When my students walk into class, the very first thing they see on the wall is a big poster with green and black lettering detailing all the words they could say instead of gay. The first time one of my students says, "Miss, this is gay," I direct them to the poster and have them choose a word to substitute. Sometimes, I'll go a bit further and tell them that this assignment doesn't like assignments of the same gender, so it is in fact not gay, and they should therefore pick a word that means what they are trying to say. The students always get a good laugh out of that, but my point is made. Don't use the word gay to mean something undesirable. Doing so only hurts people around you and makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about. I follow the same rules with the word retarded. Recently, my students and I also had quite a few conversations about not using the term illegal immigrant as well. The message here is important. What you say matters. When you use words like gay, retarded, or illegal when you're talking about something undesirable to you, think about what that means to someone who is gay, mentally retarded, or undocumented. Often these students are the ones who sit silently by, feeling beaten down by the way students use these words so callously, not even giving a second thought as to what they really mean or who they are hurting. It is important though that we go about these lessons in the right way. Every year, one of my students will bring up the fact that a writer is gay. Another student will inevitably call out, "You can't say that word." Each time this happens, I make a point to tell my students that they can say these words when they are using them properly in discussions of sexuality, disability, or when talking about an illegal activity such as stealing. They need to understand that it is not the word itself that is offensive, it is how the word is used. The point of the article is to educate people about what it means to use potentially offensive terminology, and the author makes a good argument for why one should choose different words to substitute for what has become colloquially accepted among your peers. I completely agree with this point. I have at times used terminology that could be considered offensive without realizing the implications of such. For example, I once used the expression circle jerk to mean the congratulatory act of mental masturbation in order to boost the ego of the participants such that they give the impression to others that they are the smartest persons present, and this was my intention. It was never my intention to be disrespectful to gay people, so when the first accusation of homophobia came along from the Android crowd, I had to look up circle jerk, and I did a double take. I had no idea until that moment where circle jerk had originated, only that among my peers it meant the ego boosting that I had described earlier. And this is what it comes down to, the point that the author of the Care 2 article linked below tries to explain to people. She takes her time to explain to people why it is potentially offensive to use the words or phrases they use, but the one thing she doesn't do, like any reasonable person, is to immediately jump to the conclusion that said person is inherently bigoted toward the group that the phrase or word is directed against. She acknowledges that there was not necessarily any intention on the part of the person who used the phrase in question the way that they did to make the slight or disparagement against members of whatever community the phrase or word refers to. It is human nature for people to have certain words or phrases fall into common usage whether we expect it or not. Some people think that fucking is offensive. I wouldn't expect it to be used in front of children, for example, but it doesn't bother me as an adult in the slightest. Reasonable people know how to put things into their proper context. Unreasonable people do not. For example, a reasonable person may point out that saying, "That's so gay" to reference an undesirable activity can be considered offensive, and perhaps they could choose a different phrase. An unreasonable person will immediately jump to the conclusion that the person who used the phrase was intentionally being homophobic and bigoted without question. A reasonable person may point out that the phrase, "That's really girly," might be potentially offensive to women, and perhaps one could choose a phrase that doesn't potentially offend approximately 50% of the human population. An unreasonable person will immediately jump to the conclusion that you are a misogynist, a hater of women and everything that they stand for. An unreasonable person will assume that the phrase, "You fucking cunt," means that you are, again, a misogynist and a hater of women, ignoring the fact that women also use the phrase themselves and ignoring the potential use of the words dick, prick, cock, and similar other anatomical references that might also be considered sexist, an example of misandry. A reasonable person might be offended by their usage, but they won't jump to a conclusion like that. If a woman tells someone to take their tampon out in reference to someone who is being emotionally unstable, exhibiting mood swings, or is being hysterically irrational, does that make her a misogynist in spite of the fact that she is, in fact, a woman herself? The answer to these questions should, in a majority of cases, be no. There can, and at times there are, exceptions to this, but that doesn't mean that it applies to everyone, or that it should apply to every occasion in which the situation occurs. If someone wanders around with a placard that says God hates fags, then you would be reasonable in assuming that the person is homophobic, unless that person is a young child, but that's another situation entirely. Also, as a side note, if someone refers to smoking fags, perhaps in the USA you might be justified in thinking that the person using the phrase is talking about going around with a weapon shooting gay people. But in the UK, my home territory, it refers to the smoking of cigarettes. Yes, in the UK, fag is a synonym for cigarette. Don't ask me why, I couldn't tell you. If a person uses a phrase, "that's so gay," but has exhibited absolutely no other behaviours or expressed any opinions that would suggest intolerance of anyone in the LGBTQ community, then it is the depth of unreasonable behaviour to label them as homophobic or bigoted. Once again, if the person who has used these phrases is guilty of anything, it is of not thinking before they speak. I'm sure this is something that we have all, at one time or another, done in the past, myself included, because I often speak, and in some cases type, before I think. It is unreasonable to go beyond this point without prior evidence, and that's the point. Thank you for listening.